Hey guys, what's happening? Nihat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we'll be exploring The Descent, which is a 2005 British horror film written and directed by the talented Neil Marshall, who brought us Dog Soldiers and Doomsday, which I covered a few weeks back and will be leaving links to below. Marshall is also responsible for the Hellboy reboot, which is set to be released in a few months. As the name would suggest, The Descent is about a journey down into the dark, something we experience through the female protagonists who are skilled climbers, hikers, and divers. While the group were extremely capable individuals with a lot of experience, a bad judgment call by one of them who decides to take them to an unexplored cave system creates a cascade of events that forces each and every one of them to fight for their survival. Dealing with the topics of loss and grief, as witnessed through the eyes of the film's protagonist Sarah, the film also explores how different people cope with tragedy and the limits that the mind and body can go before breaking. After the moderate success of Dog Soldiers, Marshall was highly sought after by studios to direct other horror films, and though the director was wary of being typecast, he eventually agreed to make The Descent as he felt that they were both two very different films. The filmmakers had originally planned to have a mixed cast, but eventually agreed that horror films rarely have an all-female cast, usually because the characters were saved by men, and the distinction here was that these women would have to use their wits to survive, which was a welcome departure from classic horror film tropes. Though much of the film is set in North America, the picture was actually shot in the UK, with exterior scenes being filmed in Scotland, while the interior scenes were shot at Pinewood Studios. The filmmakers had initially considered shooting in actual caves, but ultimately decided that this would be too dangerous and time-consuming.
Changing the look through colour and texture, so adding stalactites, maybe making one of them wet, one of them very dry and dusty. So we're hopefully fooling the audience into thinking that the cave system is much bigger than what we're actually building.
The Maze of Caves were designed by Simon Bowles, who'd worked on Marshall's Dog Soldiers and Doomsday, and the designer along with his team sought out to create a world of subterranean darkness. In total, there were 21 cave sets built by Rod Vass and his Armadillo production company, using a unique system of polyurethane that was cut out and painted to look like rocks. Photos and videos of cave systems found around the world were studied by the production team, who then had the arduous task of recreating the cave structures and set pieces that were reused and altered slightly to indicate that the characters had entered different parts of the caves. Considering the women were straying further away from natural light sources, the crew experimented with limiting the lighting to what the characters brought with them into the caves, and this helped add to the claustrophobic experience on screen. Not only was the group trapped in an unexplored cave system with little to no supplies and limited lighting, but as the film pushed on, we came to realize that they were not alone, as the cave is revealed to contain humanoid creatures known as crawlers that had evolved and adapted to life underground. The film begins with the thrill-seeking trio Juno, Beth and Sarah whitewater rafting in high-octane rapids. Early on, we can see that Sarah's husband Paul and Juno appear to have something going on, alluding to an affair. And as Paul, Sarah, and their daughter Jessica depart for the hotel, Paul, who is both distant and distracted, veers their car onto the wrong side of the road, leading to his death and the death of their daughter. Picking up a year later, Beth, Juno, Sarah, and their friends Sam and Rebecca, as well as newcomer Holly, all reunite at a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina for a spelunking adventure. Now, it's explained that the expedition had been organized by Juno, who had intentionally kept her distance from Sarah, unable to cope with the loss of her lover Paul and the betrayal of her friend. Out of a misplaced desire to take her friend somewhere special, Juno puts all of their lives at risk by choosing an isolated and unexplored cave system with an ecosystem that had been relatively undisturbed. And while they all assume they were heading to a known cave system, it's not until they get trapped that Juno reveals the severity of their situation. Foolish as this was, I think it's also important to note that had everything gone well, the group would have been able to name the cave as its first explorers, a gift Juno was hoping to bestow upon Sarah. Though they managed to descend into the darkness with ease, after moving through a narrow passage, the path behind them gets inundated with debris caused by a sudden collapse. After a heated discussion where the group attempt to decide what to do next, Juno reveals that there was no good in them waiting for a rescue, as she'd not only led them to an unknown cave system, but she'd also failed to notify emergency services of their actual location, a major no-no when it comes to going into the wild or deep underground. This is also the first time the crawlers are noticed, with Sarah seeing a glimpse of one of their heads for a split second, though she initially shrugs it off as a hallucination. One of the things I love about this film is that not only does it feature well-developed characters whose interrelationships are explored throughout the film, but each one of the women genuinely feel like experienced explorers. It's because of this that when they stumble upon their first hurdle, the film still feels like an adventure thriller, and it's not until they discover the crawlers that we begin heading into horror territory, a transition that is supported by the dark, claustrophobic environment they have to traverse. As the group push on through the cave system with hopes of finding an exit, they discover climbing equipment from a previous caver, and a cave painting that suggested an exit existed. Holly then begins to move quickly after thinking that she'd seen sunlight and slips down a hole, breaking her shin bone in the process. While the other girls made a splint for Holly's leg, Sarah wanders off and finds a helmet of another explorer that had been there 100 years earlier, and after hearing a clicking noise in the distance, she spots what appears to be a humanoid creature drinking water a few feet away from her. Unfortunately for Sarah, the group continue to dismiss her claims of having seen something, assuming it to be a hallucination. It's not until they continue further ahead that they find a chamber littered with hundreds of skeletal remains. The crawlers then begin circling the group, leading Sarah, Rebecca and Sam to run away. Holly is then attacked by one of the creatures, which bites her in the neck and attempts to take her body away, until it's stopped by Juno, who desperately fights for her friend, wounding one of them with a pickaxe and killing another creature as Holly is dragged away. Beth comes back to help but is impaled in the neck by Juno after surprising the already on edge explorer who thought that she'd seen another monster. Beth then collapses with Juno's pendant in her hand, and now in a state of shock, Juno leaves her friend behind. Sarah continues to get flashbacks of her daughter appearing to her in the dark, and after slipping and banging her head, she wakes up in the crawler's den to find them eating Holly. While the environment is pitch black, she sees their nefarious activities by using the infrared setting on her camera. Judging by how the crawlers move in the cave, it appears as though they were blind, responding to sound and vibrations, and using a form of echolocation to map their surroundings. This idea is also explored by Sam, a biology student who explains that the crawlers had evolved perfectly to live in the dark, rising to the surface occasionally to hunt during the night.
Don't touch it.
You wouldn't want to pick it up.
What do you think did that, Sam? A bear?
What is this? Nature detectives? Could have been Bigfoot for all you know. Come on.
As tensions rise, each of the women begin to go through a transformation. Sarah overcomes her initial fear and uses her ingenuity to try and find a way out. Beck and Sam also team up together as their fight or flight instincts start to kick in, though they unfortunately end up with the same fate as Holly. Juno also becomes a badass beast that begins hunting down the crawlers in the same manner that they pursued her friends. Now, Sarah eventually finds Beth in the caverns, who tells her not to trust Juno as she'd left her to die. She also hands her Juno's necklace, which had come off during their previous encounter, and read "Love each day," something Sarah's husband used to say, indicating that they were indeed having an affair. Sarah's then attacked by an adolescent crawler and its mother, but is able to take them both out, along with an adult male crawler, in a moment that highlights her transformation from a passive victim to an active survivor. Both Sarah and Juno end up being the last two survivors, and after making their way close to the exit, the pair start fighting all the crawlers in their way through violent and vicious means. The two then end up squaring off, and after Sarah reveals that she'd found Juno's necklace, she proceeds to stab her in the leg, ensuring that Juno couldn't go on while she headed towards an exit. Now, Sarah appears to make it out and drives for a while, eventually pulling over after she felt that she was in the clear, but when she looks over to her side, she sees a vision of Juno staring back at her before the screen cuts to black. This is the end that was used for the film's release in the US, but in the UK ending, it's revealed that this was all in her head, along with the visions of her daughter that plagued her throughout the film, leaving us with a final shot of Sarah, who was actually still trapped in the cave. Judging by the UK ending, which is in essence the director's cut, I feel as though Sarah had suffered so much and been so physically and psychologically scarred by her experiences that she'd lost her humanity by the film's conclusion.
Okay. Juno, I won't break. I'm fine.
When speaking about the film, Marshall explained that he first chose to have a dark cave as a setting for his film, before adding the characters and the crawlers, which he described as something that would attack the women that was not entirely human. Marshall also described the crawlers as cavemen who never left the caves, leading to their evolution in darkness. While he initially planned on having all male crawlers, he ended up adding mothers and children into the colony of creatures, explaining, "It's a colony after all, and I thought that if they'd all been male, it would have made no sense as to how they continued to procreate, and the addition of their families helped create a more realistic context for them." When it came to production, the director had actually barred the film's cast from seeing the other actors in full crawler makeup until their first appearance on screen. So during the moment when the women first saw the creatures, their reactions of fear and terror were actually genuine.
I made a deliberate point of keeping the crawlers away from the girls. I just wanted to see what the effect would be.
Action!
I think I found the way through! Is there anybody there? Hello?
This is by far Marshall's best film to date, as it's as much a monster film as it is a psychological horror that explores how we cope with guilt, loss, and betrayal. From the moment the women get trapped in the caves until the last scene in both the US and UK endings, there is a constant build-up of tension which aligns with the claustrophobic environment and the threat of creatures that were around the corner. All in all, The Descent is a gory, tense, vicious, enthralling, surprising, and unrelenting look at the human psyche and the limits that the mind and body can go before breaking. Well, that's all for today, folks. Big thanks to all of you guys who requested we take a closer look at The Descent. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content. And if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Nihat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.